mostly because of the stage directions, like right before the sort of interchange occurs, where they're talking about lurid and reflections appearing on the wall around Blanche and like grotesque shadows, things like that. It kind of indicates to me that Blanche is just sort of having an episode.
Can I respond to this? Or Phil, why don't you respond and then I'll respond.
I was just going to say that I would love to believe that this woman did not actually get raped, but the whole thing where, what's up?
Keep going. Keep going.
In the context of the text. But, I think that when Stanley says we've had this date since the beginning, me and you, that really just like, I'm like, well, so it's like.
I totally get where Shelby's coming from though. Do we see that?
Yeah.
Because
I didn't get it.
it's kind of a mix of the two if we think of it that way.
Yeah.
Where she's trying to almost kind of make it seem as this is part of the fantasy and not her reality,
I'm just curious,
which
like,
leads to her
what kind of
collapsing.
perspective is this being told from?
What do we think? What perspective are you seeing it from?
In a, like, sort of like vocabulary word sort of way, but like, what is?
Like what's being said here on a greater scale, or in terms of like whose perspective of the character should we be looking at this through?
A little bit of both.
All right, what do we think? Can anyone respond to that? Because I don't want to dominate the conversation. I have specific things that I can tell you about, but Claudia, what do you think?
Okay, I know this might be taking it like a little too brief, but I did kind of look up Williams, right, and like his like good personal like history. And it was interesting to me because like he's like gay, right? But he also has a sister who was institutionalized. So I was like, I mean, I'm still not really sure like what like where he like comes down like on how like on like Blanche's side, like whether he's like with her or against her. Because like she like is, I mean, I would argue this, but she like he might think Williams might think that like she's the reason why like her like gay husband killed himself, which I would think would be like a reason for him to dislike her. But then she also is institutionalized eventually, which I would think would be a reason for Williams to sympathize with her. So like I don't know. I mean, I eventually like just because Williams like is a man, I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt and like assume that he would, you know, like if you just and so along with the way that he portrayed Blanche earlier on, like kind of having the whole facade.
Sorry, Blanche, go ahead. Keep going.
I kind of like eventually came to the conclusion that like it's possible that he used this rape as like a way to punish her.
It's actually really interesting, I think.
Thanks.
What does
what I was thinking of class metal.
Well, like it is interesting because like the mirroring of his life and their life.
We need to hear more about the, hang on, sorry, I'm totally jumping in. Claudia, I think you actually do have a valid point here in terms of the punishment of Blanche, but is it Tennessee Williams punishing her or something more?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I wasn't sure. I was like kind of unsure as to whether Williams, like, I felt like a lot of the stuff in the book was very like, this is what I wrote my commentary about. I felt like a lot of it was like very much perpetuating rape culture and like just really like misogynistic. And I felt like Williams wasn't always as clear as he could have been to like be like, this is like wrong. You know, I wasn't always sure if he was aware of the fact that he was writing rape culture and misogyny into his book or his play. Like, if that makes sense. I wasn't always sure if he was intentionally making a point. Like, yeah, using realism to make a point about the status of women in society, or if he was just a misogynist.
What I was kind of thinking about Shelby's question was the fact that almost making it kind of believe that it didn't happen is kind of pulling us into this whole idea of like fantasy within the book. Like we want to believe it doesn't happen, but like in reality, like we actually have to, like although it doesn't actually say like we have to acknowledge like that the rape did happen, like that there are these problems in our society. So I think he like I think he wrote it like that, like purposefully, obviously, to kind of have this idea like fantasy, like hoping that we want to put a facade that it didn't happen, but in reality, like you can't ignore the problems in the book. Sophia.
Okay, so when Andrea said that one of the main messages in the book is probably like how you need to accept the past and be like honest for yourself, I think that's kind of extended, but like through like is Williams punishing Blanche or is like what's happening there, and I think it's kind of like to further that you have to accept your past and like be authentic for like your own well-being basically, because like Blanche is always avoiding light, but she was described as a moth in the beginning, which is like moths are attracted to light, so she's kind of like denying her own like human nature by like avoiding the light, you know? Not human nature, but like tendencies. And so I think that if she just like accepted herself and was like true to herself, these things might not have happened to her. And I think that's kind of what Williams is saying with that like if you're honest, then you'll probably have a better life.
Yeah.
I want to go back to like the whole not facing reality thing. One aspect I found interesting was in the beginning of the book, Blanche, when Stanley's like going through Blanche's papers and everything, she gets really upset when he finds, or when he starts touching like the love letters that were from her first husband.
Yeah.
Which is like an interesting, which becomes interesting later in the book when you find out like he wasn't exactly in love with her in the same way. And the fact that like she knows about that, but she still keeps the letters and has them as a like kind of cherished possession. Kind of interesting in the fact that like
Yeah, she's like too afraid to let go of
Yeah.
the past.
too afraid to like admit, I guess in a sense, that he wasn't into her in the same way.
Harry.
I wanted to go back to something Claudia said. I sort of agree. She talked about like promoting rape culture, and I think that's kind of true because I feel like the main thing that sort of brought Stanley onto Blanche was sort of her history of very lustful and brief relationships, sluttiness for lack of a better word. And I felt like that was kind of Stanley's main reasoning for kind of taking that. So I think it's like he's not punishing Blanche for accidentally causing her husband to commit suicide. I feel like he's punishing Blanche for being like non-traditional under sexual values.
Well, do you think he's like promoting the rape culture, or he's actually just trying to bring light to the fact that it exists?
I mean, I feel like Blanche is sort of portrayed as this very like deceitful and dishonest character, and like yet she's like institutionalized. So I don't think there's like the play sort of does not create very much sympathy for her, and I feel like if he wasn't promoting rape culture, there'd be a lot more ways to empathize with her.
Yeah, it is often hard for us to empathize with Blanche. However, Tennessee Williams actually puts in a couple passages that makes us able to empathize with Stanley, our rapist and like misogynist. Namely, that he's always like being racially attacked for being Polish by Blanche. Like there's a lot of occasions in which she's just dropping, I think it's Polly that she calls him very frequently. Did I mispronounce that?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm not used to racial insults.
which is
here.
good, which is good.
But yeah, no, that's pretty common, and that draws a lot of sympathy from the audience, both away from Blanche and towards Stanley. I was just wondering why we think she includes that. Is that the perpetuation of the rape culture? Is it something else entirely? Is it just humanizing Stanley, making him not one-dimensional? What really is it?
Rachel.
Well, that was like a really loaded question, but just to like kind of go off of the whole thing that like being Polish is such a huge part of Stanley's identity, and like he like says, I don't have a page, like he's from America, like his family is from Poland, it's kind of like, I think it kind of mirrors like with the symbolism how he's like slowly bringing Blanche like to her downfall, like he's kind of making her insane because when she's hearing the Varsuviana in her head, or however you say
You
it,
said it right, good job.
that's like a polka, and that comes from Poland. I like looked it up, and like it's interesting that
You'll hear it tonight too.
it's really creepy, and that like the song that's like playing in her head as she's like going crazy is like Polish, just like the man who's like physically also making her crazy. So I think that like when she's insulting him, like there's probably like a lot of history, like maybe she like doesn't like Polish music because like it was the song that's playing when her husband like shot himself. Like there are a lot of things that like she has prejudices, and like obviously he does too, like against women, for example. So like I think there's a lot of significance behind like that his identifier is like being Polish when he's American.
Something that I guess I would ask off of kind of what's been said the past couple guys were talking about how you didn't really empathize with Blanche, like, did anyone feel a moment where they did, like, feel empathy towards her?
Yeah, I mean, kind of to go off of that, I think the kind of empathy, like, I felt for Blanche throughout the book was more just kind of like questioning whether she was like sane or not. And I feel like there's like a lot of arguments for either way, like is like she like kind of crazy, is she like not kind of crazy, does she like do things to herself? And kind of going back to everything we've been talking about false reality, I thought in the scene where Stanley may or may not have raped her.
He did.
Oh, he did?
He did.
He definitely
He definitely did, but her perspective is that it's part of this false reality.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like she's trying to not make it her reality,
Okay.
so she's
Gotcha.
getting all of these interferences, and that's really a part of there's something specific going on there that we will talk about quickly tomorrow, but it's a stylistic divergence so that she is separate from the event, so that it's no longer her, it's an object now.
Okay.
That's become her.
Like a coping mechanism.
Like she disassociates.
Yeah, there's a
Okay,
certain
that makes sense.
disassociation going on.
Anyway, yeah, so like, and I just think it's interesting how when she is raped, like Harry was saying, it's all about the noise and the stage direction and no one explicitly says anything, and kind of when you're introduced to some of her alternate realities, it's always explicitly said, like when she talks about that guy in Florida, she like keeps talking about him to make it sound like more real. When real things are actually happening, it's all implicit through like the sounds and the stage directions. And I think it's like, what the purpose of that is, I feel like it's kind of left up for the reader to interpret and question whether Blanche is sane or not, and almost like question like what is sanity, which I think like I was kind of thinking about that, and then when Claudia said that like he had an institutionalized sister, it kind of made me like really like think that was true, that he kind of wanted us to question whether or not Blanche is sane and what makes a person sane or not, like is Stanley insane the way he behaves. So I don't know, that kind of diverged from your question, but I kind of felt empathy for her in the way that like, you know, I didn't really feel like everything was her fault because
Yeah.
of.
I would agree. I felt empathy towards her like after the rape or whatever, because I like felt the kind of idea that like Stanley like clearly took control over her, and like it was that struggle that like women face throughout the book about just like trying to deal with that power struggle they have with men. Deanna.
I think something also interesting to address, which I like discussed in my commentary, is this idea that like whether Williams is really explicit in talking about like really kind of dark and like real things. Like he doesn't necessarily directly like state that she was raped, but in the end, something that I thought was really disturbing was when Stella sent Blanche off, and then like she kind of just went back to Stanley after he like came over her and was like calling her his love and everything. And something that I thought was really interesting was in the movie, which I saw a while ago. In the end, she like leaves him, which like isn't at all in the play like in the slightest bit. And it's kind of this idea of like what, you know, the audience wants to see or like wants to hear, and kind of how like Tennessee Williams like doesn't necessarily like meet what like we as an audience want to expect to happen.
Were there a lot of other differences between the play and the book?
Not so much.
Yeah, no, that was like mainly, but at the end you're just kind of like, what? She like takes the baby and was like, I'll never go back to him, and it's just really like abrupt.
We need a final comment, so who wants it?
Okay. Well, although in the beginning we were talking about whether Stella and Blanche are likable, I think that like even if you don't think they are, you can definitely empathize with them. Like you pity how much like Blanche has such an immense sense of like guilt and grief over her husband's suicide and like losing her family's property. And so what Rachel brought up before with the folk music, like when that is in her head, like it's just like reminding her that she has to face what she's done, but like that is where like her loss of sanity comes in. And there's a quote on page 141 that says, "A distant revolver shot is heard, Blanche seems relieved." So I think like it's so sad that like I interpreted it as though like the shot is like the sound of her husband killing himself, but also like if that's where her sense of relief comes from, like maybe that signifies that like the only way for her to escape this like reality that she keeps putting off and like can't come to terms with is like her death. So like whether you like her or not, like it's still like such a like sad
much more to talk about. Okay, I wanna go back to Shelby's question about perspective. I'm blank, there's a specific term regarding theater that's happening with that scene where it does seem like she is disassociating from what's actually happening and therefore it doesn't seem real. And I'm forgetting the term, but I'll check my notes because I have it somewhere. The other thing about the rape culture, I totally get what you meant, Claudia. At first I was a little confused by the commentary you were making, but the more you explained it, you did a really good job explaining that. So well done, really interesting. I will say we also have to keep in mind the time, right, that this was written in, and I'm not saying it was socially acceptable, it's not, but there's a lot of other commentary that can be made with that, and we kind of reach that conclusion. We didn't talk about what happens at the end with the doctor and the matron, and how he becomes human when he takes his hat off, and she says, I've always relied on the kindness of strangers. It's a really important quote. What does it mean? What happens at the end with her? She goes with him, right, and she doesn't look back. Because what is she doing at the end?
Are you talking about Blanche?
Blanche, yeah, what is she doing at the end? Is she facing her reality? She's kind of creating the cycle again, where she's recreating herself. As you're leaving, find your book on the cart. If there's none left in your book, come talk to me. Find your essay. And if you rewrote your poem, find that too. Shelby, I have yours in my hand. I have Sophia's, Deanna's, Jackie's. Rachel B. Put that on her desk. Shelby. Really kind of cool perspective about race that. No, I think it's kind of a cool point, and it really is something specific where he's kind of diverging from reality.
So I'm just like
doing that
reading
for
it,
this
like,
play.
the lights are going down.
Yeah, and the lurid shadows. And even at the beginning of that, when she's kind of disconnected from reality. Right?
And then like earlier in the show, she's like talking about how she goes to the shot.
Yeah,
She's like, what?
yeah. It's almost kind of like the past has interfered so much in her presence that she's no longer.
So I'm
part
just
of the
like
present.
curious, is she really experiencing and are we really experiencing reality?
Well, yeah, and that's actually a really cool point because she is she no longer she no longer is actually even standing up on her own. She collapses as if she's like completely gone, which also says something else about what Stanley's doing there, right?
I'm gonna write more.
Yeah. Oh, people for the road, come on up here. There's no roads over there. There's a library downstairs. You can take out the waiting desk. If those are outside with the public library, or you can buy it, or we run out of copies here. So get it sooner rather than later, so you have to figure out everything. Okay? A banana and there's 5 people. I guess we'll take 2. But it's all good.
Are we taking these?
I take them, bring it back tomorrow. You don't want to see comments or anything? You're all good.
Just run.
And then like,
There are no more devices going, right?
oh, I need to run more. Are you going to take a walk?
Yeah, I'm
Take a
fine.
walk and then you're great. We can do it. My keys are up there. We can go take a walk. Anyone else want their papers?